Here's a number that should ruin your Monday. The average Canadian retiree spends roughly $2,700 a month just to maintain a basic standard of living. The average CPP payment? Just under $900. Throw in old age security and the guaranteed income supplement, and you're scraping together maybe $1,900 to $2,100 a month. If you're lucky, if you planned right, if the government doesn't quietly change the formula again while you're not looking. In most Canadian cities, that's not retirement. That's a slow financial drowning with very polite signage. But here's what the financial advisors selling you mutual funds will never tell you. Canada is absolutely enormous, and most of it has been sleeping through a cost of living crisis that never reached it. There are towns, real towns, with hospitals and coffee shops and opinions about hockey, where $1,800 a month doesn't just cover your bills. It covers your bills, your hobbies, your Wednesday night wine, and still leaves you money for an emergency. 10 of them, today. Hit that like button if you're brave enough to see number 1, and subscribe because, trust me, you are not ready for where this is going. Number 10. Campbellton, New Brunswick. Population? 6,800. Located precisely at the border of New Brunswick and Quebec, draped along the Restigouche River like a postcard that got wet and never quite dried out properly. Let's set the scene. You wake up. The river is visible from your kitchen window, which, and this is important, you actually own. Your detached 2-bedroom, reasonably maintained house with a backyard and a driveway cost you somewhere between $120,000 and $165,000. Yes, that is a real number. No, we're not talking about a leaning structure held together by nostalgia and expired paint. We're talking about real houses on real streets. The median home price in Campbellton hovers around $140,000, roughly 1/7 of what the same square footage costs in Toronto. Let that number dissolve in your brain for a moment. Monthly rent for a 2-bedroom apartment runs you $750 to $950. Groceries benefit from being near Quebec, where competition between chains keeps prices in check. Your total monthly cost of living, housing, food, utilities, transit, the odd restaurant meal, lands somewhere in the $1,400 to $1,700 range. On a combined CPP, OAS, GIS income, you are not just surviving, you are, in the most genuine sense of the word, fine. Now, the honesty portion of this segment. Campbellton has been punched repeatedly by the economy. The forestry industry wobbled. The young people left. The Tim Hortons on the main strip is doing more emotional support work than any single coffee shop should reasonably be asked to carry. According to a surprisingly active Facebook group for the area, the biggest local controversy in recent memory involved a proposed roundabout that the residents ultimately and furiously voted down. This is the level of drama you're retiring into. Consider whether that's a feature or a bug. What locals will tell you with zero irony is that the river salmon fishing is legitimately world-class. The Restigouche is one of the finest Atlantic salmon rivers on the continent. You can drive to the Gaspésie in under an hour. The Sugarloaf Provincial Park sits right on the edge of town with ski hills that don't take themselves too seriously. The bilingual character, French bleeds in from just across the border, gives the place a texture that surprises people who expected nothing. The winters are committed. We're talking January temperatures that reach -25 with the kind of wind that has a personality. But the summers are genuinely magnificent, the kind of warm, green, slow days that feel like the Canada they used to make TV movies about. Number 9. Bathurst, New Brunswick. About 40 minutes east along the Chaleur Bay, there's a town that functions like Campbellton's slightly more polished sibling, the one who did a semester in Quebec and came back with bilingual signage and a Thursday farmers market. Bathurst. Population just under 11,000. The Bay of Chaleur at your doorstep, which, if you've never stood on its shores in July, is one of those genuinely unreasonable views that makes you deeply suspicious of how a place this beautiful remains this affordable. House prices in Bathurst range from around $130,000 to $185,000 for solid residential properties. The rental market sits at $800 to $1,100 for a two-bedroom. What Bathurst has that Campbellton doesn't is a slightly broader service base, a regional hospital, a YMCA, more retail variety, and a francophone population that gives the social fabric a richness that monolingual towns often lack. About half the population identifies as French first. You will learn French, willingly or through osmosis. Both outcomes are fine. One local on Reddit described Bathurst as the place where time runs slower and everybody knows when you got a haircut. This is accurate. The social density of a small maritime town means you will be woven into the community whether you planned to be or not. New retirees report this either as the best thing that ever happened to them or as an unforeseen complication, depending entirely on how much they enjoyed being anonymous in the city. The economic trajectory is honest. Bathurst has been managing its transition out of resource extraction, mining, forestry, for decades. The downtown has some vacancy. There are empty storefronts that have been empty long enough that the for lease signs have developed their own weather damage. But the bones are good, the community investment is real, and the municipal government has been quietly aggressive about recreation infrastructure. Kayaking on the bay, cross-country skiing, a beach in summer that genuinely competes with anything in the Maritimes. The Bathurst Papermakers junior hockey team, which fills arenas in a town this size with a fervor that suggests hockey here is less a sport and more a spiritual practice. On pension income, you can live here with room to breathe, not wide-open prairie room, maritime room. Cozy, slightly damp room that smells like salt water and wood smoke and feels, against all logic, like home after about 3 weeks. Speaking of places that feel strange until they don't, number 8, Flin Flon, Manitoba, Saskatchewan. Flin Flon sits on top of a Precambrian rock shield, straddles 2 provincial borders, was named for a fictional submarine commander from a dime novel that a prospector was reading when he found the ore body, and has a giant cartoon statue of that fictional character as its civic mascot. That's before we even get to the cost of housing. This is a town that seems to have been designed by someone who had a lot of ideas and none of them were boring. The population is around 5,000. The houses are literally built on rock, blasted into the Canadian Shield, which means basements are rare and foundations are eternal. 2-bedroom homes sell for $80,000 to $130,000. You read that correctly, $80,000 for a house in Canada in the 21st century. Let that sit with you while you think about your mortgage. Monthly rent for a decent 2-bedroom apartment? Around $700 to $900. Total monthly living costs for a retired individual are estimated in the $1,300 to $1,600 range. This is not poverty arithmetic. This is a pension actually winning. Flin Flon exists because of copper and zinc mining, and the Hudbay Minerals operation shaped this town's identity the way a river shapes a canyon, slowly, completely, and in ways you can't separate from the landscape. The mine has wound down its operations significantly over the years, which has affected the town's population and economy. This is real and worth acknowledging. But the thing about resource towns that survive the mine is that they tend to have unusually stubborn, creative populations. Flin Flon has 15 lakes within 15 minutes. That's a statistic that Muskoka cottage country would murder to claim. The fishing, walleye, pike, lake trout, is extraordinary. The snowmobiling and ice fishing culture is borderline evangelical. There's a skate park, there's a curling club, there are northern lights that appear above town with the nonchalant frequency of a regular commuter. Be honest with yourself, though. Flin Flon is remote. Winnipeg is a 6-hour drive. Medical specialty services require travel. The winter, at its depths, is not a metaphor. It is an actual adversary with a temperature range that extends into the -30s. One longtime resident on a small-town Manitoba forum described it as the kind of cold that makes you respect everything. That's poetry or a warning, possibly both. But if raw northern Manitoba makes you twitch, let's go somewhere the landscape looks like another planet entirely. Number 7. Drumheller, Alberta. Imagine you're driving across the Alberta prairie. Flat, wheat, more flat, a grain elevator you recognize from the back of the old $5 bill, more flat, and then, without ceremony, the earth simply drops away, and you're at the edge of the Badlands, a canyon system of hoodoos and eroded sandstone that looks like someone set the American Southwest down in the middle of Canada and walked away without explaining themselves. Drumheller. Population around 7,800, the self-proclaimed dinosaur capital of the world, a claim with unusually strong fossil evidence supporting it. This is where T-Rex bones and hadrosaur eggs have been pulled from the earth in quantities that would embarrass a natural history museum. The Royal Tyrrell Museum, sitting 8 kilometers outside of town, is genuinely world-class, the kind of institution that people from larger cities drive hours to visit, and you will be able to drop in on a Tuesday afternoon in November when no one else is there. Home prices in Drumheller range from roughly $180,000 to $280,000, somewhat higher than our maritime entries, but extraordinary by Alberta standards, where Calgary proper has long since lost its mind on housing costs. Rent for a 2-bedroom sits at $900 to $1,200. The Alberta advantage, no provincial sales tax, a relatively low overall tax burden, makes the monthly math work. Monthly costs run approximately $1,600 to $1,900 for a retiree, putting you right at the upper edge of comfortable on a full OAS CPP GIS package. You won't be luxuriating, but you will be living in a canyon. The community is unexpectedly vibrant for a place this geologically dramatic. There's a wine festival, a theater scene. The Drumheller Valley has a kind of rugged, unapologetic character. People here chose this landscape on purpose, and they'd like you to know they made the right call. The river valley means microclimates, which means fruits and vegetables grow here that have no business growing on the Canadian prairies. The summers are warm, dry, and breathtakingly beautiful. The winters are cold but sunny, Alberta's gift to the afflicted. The wind funnels through the valley in ways that are dramatic but rarely the punishing, soul-crushing cold of the open prairie. Locals on the Drumheller subreddit reliably tell newcomers that the landscape itself is what keeps you, that after a few months of watching the light change on the hoodoos, the idea of going back somewhere flat becomes vaguely offensive. If Drumheller is Alberta's secret, Ontario's been sitting on one even quieter. Number 6. Kapuskasking, Ontario. There's a certain kind of town in northern Ontario that looks like it was designed by a committee. Streets laid out in a deliberate curve pattern, a central park that feels faintly civic, faintly European, buildings that suggest someone somewhere had a plan. Kapuskasking was that town, built in the 1920s as a planned company town around a Spruce Falls pulp and paper mill, designed by architects who believed workers deserved order and green space and wide boulevards, a philosophy that was either paternalistic or generous depending on which labor historian you ask. The mill ran for decades, then it didn't, then the town had to figure out who it was when the reason it was built stopped being the reason. Population today? Around 8,000. Home prices? Around $130,000 to $190,000. 2-bedroom rental? From $750 to $1,000. Monthly cost of living for a retiree, approximately $1,400 to $1,700. What Kapuskasking retained when the economy pivoted is its structure. The layout is genuinely livable in a way that was engineered rather than evolved. Parks are accessible. The hospital, Sensenbrenner Hospital, serves a large regional catchment and is a genuine asset for retirees, which cannot be said for every small northern community. The town has a Franco-Ontarian character, roughly 60% Francophone, that feels distinct from both the Quebec model and the Southern Ontario model. It is its own thing. The Kapuskasking River winds through town. The surrounding boreal forest is, in the technical sense, infinite. You will never run out of place to walk, snowshoe, canoe, or quietly disappear into on a Thursday when you need to think. The Northern Ontario bush has a particular quality of silence that people who grew up in cities spend thousands of dollars on wellness retreats trying to approximate. One regular on a Northern Ontario outdoors forum called Kapuskasking the last genuinely affordable town in Ontario with actual infrastructure. That's a damning compliment and probably accurate. A report from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives has repeatedly identified Northern Ontario communities as among the most affordable in the province for fixed-income households. Kapuskasking winters need their own paragraph. They are severe. The town averages among the snowiest in Ontario. The record low is the kind of number that make thermometers feel inadequate. If you are the kind of person who considers winter a spiritual experience, this is your monastery. If you consider winter something that happens to other people, plan accordingly. But for the prairie-minded, though, where the sky owns everything. Number 5. Swift Current, Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan gets a bad reputation, mostly from people who've only driven through it at highway speed while thinking about somewhere else. This is their loss and your gain. Swift Current. Population around 17,000, making it the largest entry on this list and the one that comes closest to offering actual urban amenities. It sits in the southwest corner of Saskatchewan on the Trans-Canada Highway, next to the Swift Current Creek, in a landscape that is flat the way a great painting is simple, deceptively, intentionally, with more going on than you think. Home prices? $200,000 to $280,000, which by any major Canadian market standard is an outright joke. Two-bedroom rental? $850 to $1,150. Monthly costs for a retiree? $1,500 to $1,850. Saskatchewan also has no price on carbon applied to home heating, a financial detail that adds up in ways that become meaningful over a winter. Swift Current has hospitals, specialist services, a regional mall, multiple grocery chains, the actual infrastructure of daily life without the price tag of a city. There's a University of Regina satellite presence. There's a YMCA. There are restaurants that know what they're doing. One local on a Saskatchewan retirement Facebook group described Swift Current as Saskatoon, but you can afford to live there, which is blunt but structurally sound. The city sits in ranching country, and that heritage gives it a particular character: open, direct, quietly proud, allergic to pretension. The people who have lived here for generations will tell you it's one of the safest cities in its size class in Canada, and the crime statistics roughly support that. There's a groundedness to the place that larger cities have organized themselves out of. The big sky is not a cliché, it's a daily recalibration. Sunsets that take 20 minutes and use colors not found in any urban environment. A darkness at night that allows for genuine stargazing, which, if you've spent 30 years under light-polluted city skies, will affect you more than you expect. The winters are cold. This is Saskatchewan. The wind is real. Dress accordingly and acquire a quality parka before October. Summer, conversely, is warm, long, and full of light. June in Swift Current offers nearly 16 hours of daylight, which means the seasonal math feels, somehow, fair. Number 4. Elliott Lake, Ontario. Here's something that almost no town in Canada can claim. Elliott Lake was literally, deliberately, officially repurposed as a retirement community by the provincial government. In the 1990s, uranium mining, the industry that built and sustained Elliott Lake since the 1950s, collapsed almost overnight. The town, which had peaked at 25,000 residents, was staring at a demographic freefall. What happened next was either visionary urban planning or a desperate pivot that happened to work, depending on which account you read. The local government and provincial agencies actively marketed Elliott Lake as an affordable retirement destination. They recruited retirees. They built services for them. They made the town itself the product. It worked. The population stabilized. Today, Elliott Lake has around 10,000 residents, with a notably older median age, a density of retiree services that would be the envy of communities 3 times its size, and home prices that are almost violently affordable. A detached home in Elliott Lake, $130,000 to $210,000. 2-bedroom condo with services, $800 to $1,100 per month rent, or purchased for $80,000 to $130,000. Monthly living costs for a retiree, $1,500 to $1,850. This is not theoretical pension math. This is a town that spent 30 years figuring out how to make pension math work and built the infrastructure to prove it. The Retirement Living Program, now administered through local services rather than a formal provincial scheme, means there are actual support structures for aging in place. Meal programs, social activities, a hospital, a network of services that you'd typically expect in a community twice its size. Elliott Lake sits on the north shore of Lake Huron, surrounded by a landscape of lakes, rivers, and Canadian Shield terrain that attracts outdoors enthusiasts with the single-minded reliability of a gravitational force. The fishing, the hiking, the fall colors, which, this close to the Shield, are not merely nice, but aggressively, unreasonably beautiful. Number 3. Powell River, British Columbia. British Columbia, from most of this script, would have seemed like a punchline. You mention affordable retirement in BC and people laugh, the hollow, slightly hysterical laugh of someone who has seen a Vancouver condo listing recently. But Powell River has been having a quiet, confident argument with that assumption for years. Located on the Sunshine Coast, 4 hours north of Vancouver via a ferry and a highway that rewards the patient, Powell River has a population of around 14,000 and a character that is approximately equal parts retired logger, relocated artist, aging hippie, young homesteader, and bewildered newcomer who can't believe nobody told them about this earlier. Home prices? $380,000 to $520,000. Yes, higher than anything else on this list, because this is still British Columbia and the real estate market has opinions. But rent, and this is where the math shifts, runs $1,100 to $1,400 for a 2-bedroom, which in BC terms is essentially free. Monthly living costs for a retiree in Powell River are approximately $1,800 to $2,100, putting it at the outer edge of what a full pension package covers, particularly if you're renting rather than owning. The trade-offs are almost offensively good. The climate is the Sunshine Coast, mild, damp, green beyond the capacity of the word green to fully communicate. Snow is a novelty. Temperatures below -10 are a once-a-decade event worth mentioning. This is the Pacific Northwest in its most livable configuration. The ocean, the mountains, the lakes. Powell River has Inland Lake, a canoe circuit that sits inside the town itself, something that most wilderness canoeists would consider science fiction. The Salish Sea at your doorstep. Orcas, sea lions, bald eagles operating as local residents rather than tourist attractions. One frequently cited thread on the r/British Columbia subreddit described Powell River as what the rest of BC wishes it could be, which is equal parts compliment and provocation and probably accurate. There's an active arts scene, a performing arts center, craft breweries, a food culture that leverages local seafood and produce. The Ka-Tet Regional District has been deliberately building livability infrastructure. The ferry dependency is real. Accessing anything that requires a larger city means planning and travel time. Medical specialists require trips to Vancouver. Internet speeds have improved significantly in recent years, but can still surprise you with sudden opinions about their limitations. For a certain kind of retiree, ocean-minded, outdoors-oriented, comfortable with a slower cadence, Powell River doesn't feel like a compromise. It feels like the plan all along. But the most beautiful town on this entire list that no one is talking about? That's coming next. Number 2. Temiskaming, Quebec. There is a town in western Quebec that sits on the shores of Lake Temiskaming like a postcard from a country that no longer exists in the way it used to, and it might be the most improbably lovely place you can retire on a pension in this country. Temiskaming, population around 2,500, named for the lake it embraces. The lake is enormous, stretching 60 kilometers across the Ontario-Quebec border, and the town sits at its southern narrows with a view so compositionally perfect it seems staged. Home prices in Temiskaming are so low they will cause you a small amount of distress. $80,000 to $160,000 for detached properties. Two-bedroom rental? $600 to $850. Monthly total cost of living for a retiree in Temiskaming? $1,200 to $1,500, putting it at the outer edge of what a full pension package covers, particularly if you're renting rather than owning. The trade-offs are almost offensively good. The climate is essentially boreal, with full exposure to winter. The average temperature in January is about -12 degrees Celsius, with substantial snowfall. Boreal forests have a subtle open-field quality, narrow spaces made of dark tree trunks and bright snow that feel like a different planet. The community is tight in the way that communities with fewer than 3,000 people always are, a tightness that is either warm or suffocating depending on what you need from people. Francophone mostly, with enough Anglophone history that the town navigates both without visible effort. The Abitibi-Temiskaming region has been working hard on tourism and outdoor recreation infrastructure, with canoe routes, hunting and fishing lodges, and trail systems spreading across the territory. Access to Temiskaming is 2.5 hours from North Bay, Ontario. Services are limited locally. This is a place for people who genuinely want to slow down, for whom the stripping away of urban convenience is not a sacrifice, but an ambition. For those people, this might be number 1. But number 1 on this list is number 1 for a different reason entirely. Dawson City, Yukon. Let me describe your retirement. You wake up in July to a sun that never set, walk outside into silence so complete you can hear your own pulse. Look south and see the Yukon River, wide, gray-green, glacial origin powerful, slide past the wooden boardwalk of a town that existed before the 20th century had fully decided what it wanted to be. Walk past the Diamond-Tooth Gertie's gambling hall, past the buildings that lean slightly because the permafrost beneath them has opinions about vertical. Past a coffee shop run by someone who moved here from Berlin 15 years ago and has never once regretted it. Order your coffee and think about how you got here. Dawson City, population around 1,500, latitude 64 degrees north. Home prices $200,000 to $350,000 for a year-round home. Rents for a 2-bedroom hover around $1,100 to $1,400. Monthly cost of living is the wild card. Utilities run high in subarctic conditions, heating costs are genuine, but Yukon residents benefit from the Yukon government's relatively robust support for affordable living, including significant territorial support supplements for seniors on low income. your effective monthly outlay as a retiree, all in, lands somewhere between $1,700 and $2,100. The Northern Residence Deduction on your federal income taxes provides meaningful relief. The Yukon's Seniors Income Supplement and other territorial programs exist specifically because the government acknowledges you are living at 64 degrees north and your propane bill is a moral experience. The community in Dawson City is one of the most genuinely eccentric, warm, and intellectually alive small communities in Canada. Artists, writers, gold miners, river guides, Parks Canada historians, first-generation immigrants who ended up here through a chain of events that makes a great story, and the Trondek-Wet'chin First Nation people whose relationship with this place predates the gold rush by thousands of years. Dawson City's Trondek-Wet'chin Cultural Center is not a tourist attraction, it is a living institution. The Yukon Arts Center, the Klondike Institute of Art and Culture, the Dawson City Music Festival, which draws international performers to the subarctic every summer in a display of logistical optimism that works against all reasonable expectations. The Yukon Quest dog sled race has its terminus here. You will see dog teams, you will feed them snacks against the race rules, you will not regret this. The midnight sun in June means 22 hours of daylight and a particular ambient insanity that the locals navigate with practiced grace and the newcomers experience as a kind of beautiful psychosis. The northern lights in winter, October through April reliably, magnificently, will reset your relationship to the concept of beauty entirely. The winter. Yes, we are going to be honest about the winter. Dawson City records some of the coldest temperatures in North America outside of the true high Arctic. -40 is not unusual. -50 occasionally is not impossible. Your car will have a block heater, your face will have a balaclava, you will develop opinions about insulation you never thought you'd have. But here's what no one tells you. The community inside that cold is dense and warm in proportion to the harshness outside. The social life in Dawson City is extraordinary precisely because you need each other. The pub, the community hall, the house parties that last until 4 a.m. because when it is -40, there is nowhere to go and nothing to do but stay and talk. And it turns out, talking to interesting people in the world's most dramatic landscape is, in the most fundamental sense, a life. You moved to the city for opportunity. Dawson City offers something rarer, meaning. Here's the truth that no one in the financial industry has any incentive to tell you. Retirement in Canada doesn't have to be a spreadsheet exercise in managed disappointment. It doesn't have to be the years between your final paycheck and your final appointment navigated on a budget that turns every small pleasure into a calculation. The towns on this list are not consolation prizes for people who couldn't afford better. They're places where Canadians who found them early are living actual, full lives, fishing, hiking, socializing, watching aurora borealis, eating well, sleeping well, feeling a part of something that has texture and history, and sometimes a roundabout controversy that unites an entire Facebook group, in furious agreement. The question isn't whether you can afford to retire in one of these places. The numbers say you can. The question is whether you're brave enough to leave the familiar for the genuinely good. Drop your pick in the comments. Which of these 10 towns would you actually consider? I read every one of them, and the arguments are always spectacular. If this changed the way you think about where you could spend the next 30 years, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe because the next video in this series is going international, and some of the numbers will make today's look like downtown Vancouver. Stay curious, stay solvent, and for the love of everything, stop overpaying for October.